Hello everyone. Hope everybody is doing fine in the corona situation. We have today in our ANSD series, we have a presenter, Dr. Sujit Kumar Sinha from Aish Mysore. He's an associate professor in Department of Audiology. He's presenting on the topic vestibular profile in auditory neuropathy spectrum disorders. He is working in Aish. I think most of us know him in the area of vestibular disorders, but his areas of interest vary from diagnostic audiology to the rehabilitation part. And we welcome Dr. Sujit Sinha.
Thank you,
Can
ma'am.
you take over, Sujit?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, the topic of my presentation basically is vestibular profile in auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder. And in this presentation, most of the things which I am going to present is our own work which we have done at our Department of Audiology at Aish Mysore. So my agenda of presentation goes like this. First is I'm going to discuss neuropathy, what it means for audiologist. I'm not talking about ANSD as such. First I'm talking about the neuropathy, the types of neuropathy, certain anatomical considerations which I am going to take up, vestibular tests and the expected findings in cases with ANSD, and the studies which we have done at Aish that I'm going to present, and the findings whatever we have in these cases. I'm going to give the reasoning for each of these findings. So first is what is ANSD, and this all we all know since ages that the ANSD basically their hearing threshold which ranges between normal to profound hearing loss, and they have absent middle ear muscle reflexes with OE or CM present and ABRs are absent. This is what we have learned since our BSc days, that this is a case of typical auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder. Before I come to this again auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder, first I am going to discuss what is neuropathy. That we have to understand because most of us fail to understand what is a neuropathic conditions. Now the term neuropathy basically it means a pathology of the peripheral nerve fibers rather than their neuronal cell body of origin. That means to say that if the pathology is confined only to the myelin sheath and the axons, that is called as neuropathy. If the lesion in a neuron, if it is there in the cell body, it is referred to as neuronopathy or ganglionopathy. Neuronopathy or ganglionopathy is a condition of the cell body. If the subject has a neuronopathy or ganglionopathy, it leads to a condition which is called as Wallerian degeneration, which is nothing but it is the death of the entire neuron, that is the death of the myelin or the death of the axon, the complete neuron. It leads to Wallerian degeneration. But this neuronopathy or ganglionopathy is not considered to be neuropathy. It is the lesion of the axon and the lesion of the myelin sheath. Number one. Number two, there are three types of neuropathy basically: demyelinating, axonal, and mixed. Most of us, which we know that there are three types. And what we have to understand here is the myelin cannot survive without axon, and axon cannot survive without myelin. So even if a pathology can start from a demyelinating disorder, can start from an axonal disorder, eventually the pathology is going to result in a mixed disorder. It is never going to be there at a demyelinating condition or an axonal conditions. Moving to first, we understand the demyelinating condition. As we know that myelin sheath is important for the saltatory conduction or the faster conduction of the action potential. Now, demyelinating condition or demyelinating neuropathy is nothing but there is a loss of myelin sheath. Now, if we understand the neuron, there could be two types of demyelination which can occur. One is a paranodal demyelination, which is nothing but a small segment within the myelin sheath will get affected. And second is segmental demyelination, where there is an absence of the complete myelin sheath over here. Now, whatever happens, whether it is a paranodal demyelination or whether it is a segmental demyelination, what happens is the end result is nothing but the action potential slows down. That means say that basically the timing of the signal will get affected. However, there are certain cases where there is a remyelination also occurs. But what we have to understand is that if the demyelinating condition occurs because of a metabolic disorders, it never gets remyelinated. It's the damage, it's a permanent damage which it is going to cause. Now, axonal neuropathy, when we are trying to understand axonal neuropathy, we have to understand in two terms. One is in terms of diameter and second is in terms of the length. Now diameter, when we understand, there are certain axons which have got more diameter and there are certain axons which have got lesser diameter. And what we have to understand is more the diameter of the axons, more faster is the conduction of the action potential. Okay. And the second thing is the length of the axons are very important, and the larger the length of the axon, they get affected faster compared to the shorter axons. Okay, and this is basically a dying back pathology wherein there is a sign and symptom which is distal to the site of the lesion, and hence what will happen is the longer fibers or the longer tracts will get affected faster compared to the shorter ones. And the picture which you can see here, this is called as a stock gloves phenomena, wherein the individual will get symptom in their legs first and in their hands first, and later it is going to spread to the whole body. This is called as stock gloves phenomena. So the larger the length, it is going to get affected faster. And now this I'm going to apply in the auditory system, that is the length of the neuron. And here what we have to understand is in the auditory system we have the auditory neurons, which is basically a bipolar neuron. And if we look into this diagram I have kept here to understand that the fiber, the auditory nerve fiber which is connected to the more apical areas have got more length compared to the middle portion of the cochlea or the basal portion of the cochlea. The shortest one is there at the middle portion of the cochlea, and that's why most of the auditory neuropathy cases what we see is a low frequency hearing loss in the beginning. That is because of this reason. Now we have to understand the vestibular nerve also. We know that there are two types of vestibular nerve: the superior vestibular nerve, that is 12,000 in number, and the inferior vestibular nerve, which is 8,000 in numbers. And basically the SVN is more in length compared to the IVN. So superior vestibular nerve has got more length compared to the IVN. And also what we have to understand is there is significantly smaller lumen which is available for superior vestibular nerve and its arterioles compared to the inferior vestibular nerve and its blood supply. So at any point of the time when we look into the superior vestibular nerve and the inferior vestibular nerve, the superior vestibular nerve is likely to get damaged faster compared to the inferior vestibular nerve. Now we also have to understand the differences between the cochlear and the vestibular nerve. The differences between the cochlear and the vestibular nerve is that the vestibular nerve has got more diameter compared to the cochlear nerve. And because of this diameter, what will happen is the vestibular nerve will take little more time to get damaged compared to the cochlear nerve. And hence the auditory neuropathy subject may start showing his or her symptom from the cochlear symptoms compared to the vestibular symptoms early on. So here the vestibular neurons are more in diameter compared to the cochlear, and hence the damage will be at a later point of the time for the vestibular system, vestibular nerves compared to the cochlear nerve. Now here which we have to understand is nothing but we know that in auditory neuropathy subjects we have the otoacoustic emission or the cochlear microphonics which is normal, and which suggested normal OHC function. It does not suggest only a normal OHC function, but it also suggests a normal inner ear function as such. And we know that both the cochlea as well as vestibular, they share the same fluid, that is the endolymph. So if there is going to be any problem with the endolymphatic system, it is going to affect both the cochlear as well as vestibular side, such as in cases with Meniere's disease. But in these cases, since the outer hair cell is normal, we assume that the inner ear is normal. And when the inner ear is normal, we assume that the inner ear portion, that is the labyrinth of the vestibular system, is also normal. So here in ANSD, we also know that there is an abnormal ABR that is coming from the nerve here. So we can presume that because the cochlear portion of the neuron, is affected, the vestibular neurons also can be affected in cases with auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder. So the labyrinth is going to be normal, but there is going to be a retrolabyrinthine lesion which can have both the cochlear as well as the vestibular branch involved. The site of lesion, which we all understand that in cases with auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder, if we look into the hearing part, then we understand that either the site of lesion is at the level of IHC or the synapses between IHC and the auditory nerve, or its auditory nerve itself. Similarly, we can presume that in cases with auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder, if they have a vestibular issues, they also can have a lesion at type one hair cells, or the lesion can be at the level of connection between the hair cells and the vestibular neurons which are connected to that, and also can be at the level of vestibular neurons itself. Another thing which we have to seriously understand is the issue of the Schwann cell versus glial cells. This is very important for us to understand this issue before we understand the auditory neuropathy or the vestibular neuropathy here. Now what we have to understand is the first peak and the second peak of ABR is coming basically from the auditory nerve. So here, which is coming from the auditory nerve, is basically coming from the Schwann cells, because peripheral nerves are myelinated by the Schwann cells and the central nerves are myelinated by the glial cells. So wave 3rd, 4 and 5 are basically coming from the glial cells, not coming from the Schwann cells. And in auditory neuropathy subject, what we find is the ABR is absent from wave 1 itself. It is never that wave 1 is present, wave 2 is present, and wave 3, 4, 5 are abnormal. No, wave 1 itself, the entire ABR is abnormal, and that goes on suggesting that the problem in the auditory neuropathy subject is more from the Schwann cell itself rather than the glial cells. So basically the auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder, if it is occurring in isolation, basically it is a pathology of the peripheral system, not the central system. There are some, this one which I am going to cover up little later, that there are certain central disorder wherein there can be auditory neuropathy, but that is secondary to the central disorders, not in isolation. In isolation, basically it is a pathology of the Schwann cells and not the glial cells. So similarly, we can assume that if the cases with auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder have a vestibular neuropathy also, they also have a problem of the Schwann cells and not the glial cells. Now, what we have to understand is what is not a neuropathy. Now we understood that what is neuropathy, and now we have to understand is what is not a neuropathy. Now, what is not a neuropathy is, first, if the cell body of the neuron is the primary site of the pathology, it is not a neuropathy. It is called as neuronopathy or ganglionopathy, which is going to lead to a Wallerian degeneration. Now, in the motor system, basically, the term neuropathy basically refers to a pathology in the peripheral nerves and not in a condition where it is leading to a Wallerian degeneration. So that we say that in the motor system, when we are referring to neuropathy, it is basically a pathology of the axon or pathology of the myelin sheath. Now, here in the cases where they have a sensory problem or the problem is there in the sensory neurons, the distinction between basically neuronopathy and neuropathy, it's not made in the peripheral sensory system. And why it is not made it? Now what we have to understand is, suppose this is the auditory system, and this we understand that there is a bipolar the neurons which is there in auditory system. There could be lesion at the level of the dendrites. The lesion could be there at the level of axon or the myelin sheath, or the lesion could be there at the level of the cell bodies itself, or there could be a lesion which can be confined at the axonal terminal button itself. But we do not have any audiological tests to separate these lesions. That is, I do not have a test where I can say that, okay, this person definitely has a problem with the dendrite or problem with the axon or problem with this one. So in the peripheral sensory system, the distinction between neuronopathy and neuropathy is not made, because we do not have a tool to separate the lesion. Now, the term neuropathy is also not applicable to demyelinating condition or axonal death in the central nervous system. So we have a term called as peripheral neuropathy, but we do not have a term called as central neuropathy. It is called as central nervous system disorders. It is not called as central neuropathy. So we are referring to neuropathy to the peripheral nerve. So the hearing loss which is there due to pathology which is confined to the white matter tracts of the brainstem or brain is considered to be a central disorder, and it is not considered to be a neuropathic conditions, such as in cases with multiple sclerosis or adrenoleukodystrophies in boys. Now let us look into some of the common vestibular tests which is done in most of the vestibular clinic everywhere. And this basically consists of a subjective test, and which is basically nothing but we have Romberg test, Fukuda stepping test, tandem gait test, etc. And then we have WEMS, and we have basically two types of WEMS: cervical vestibular evoked myogenic potentials and the ocular vestibular evoked myogenic potentials. And third, the most common test which is done across the clinic is the caloric test, which is also a part of ENG and VNG, but I have just put it separately. and ENG or VNG, which is done, which is there to separate the lesion of the peripheral system and the central system, and it also assesses the canal basically. And we have the last test, which is video head impulse test. It's a recent addition or recent tool in the vestibular assessment, which is basically designed to evaluate all the 6 semicircular canals. Now we'll go to the test one by one to understand the findings little later. So now this is the neural pathway for the cervical vestibular evoked myogenic potentials. And here, if we stimulate the saccule, the action potential will be generated in the inferior vestibular nerve, which goes to the vestibular nucleus, and a small connection through the medial vestibular spinal tract, it goes to the spinal accessory nuclei, and from the spinal accessory nuclei, then there is a connection which is going to the ipsilateral sternocleidomastoid muscle. So if we can stimulate the saccule, we can pick up something from the sternocleidomastoid muscle. But what is important here in the cervical vestibular evoked myogenic potential is the inferior vestibular nerve. If we are trying to understand the vestibular neuropathy in cases with ANSD, what becomes important for us is the inferior vestibular nerve. The second type of VEMP which is there, it's your ocular vestibular evoked myogenic potential, and here if we can stimulate the saccule through the superior vestibular nerve, the action potential goes to the vestibular nucleus, and from the vestibular nucleus it takes a contralateral route and it is supplied to the oculomotor nucleus of the opposite side, and from there it is supplied to the inferior oblique muscle. So it is a contralateral pathway basically. And again, if we are looking into the cases with ANSD, what is important for us is the superior vestibular nerve. Now the caloric test, this is a gold standard test which is done since ages across the clinic, and basically this assesses the lateral semicircular canal, wherein what we do is irrigate cold or the warm air or water inside the canal, and because of which there are convection currents which are set in the inner ear, because of which there is an activity or depolarization in the inner ear or a hyperpolarization in the inner ear, because of which the action potential will be generated in the superior vestibular nerve. I repeat, in the superior vestibular nerve, and that will pass to the lateral rectus muscle and the medial rectus muscle, and we are able to either pick up the corneoretinal potential when we are doing the ENG through the ENG machine, or we are able to pick up the eye movement when we are doing through the VNG machine. So again, what becomes important for us to understand in cases with vestibular neuropathy is the superior vestibular nerve. Now the next test which is there is the video head impulse test, and as I said that it assesses the 6 semicircular canals, and here the test is done basically in 3 planes. That is, the 2 lateral canals are tested together, and then left anterior and the right posterior are tested together, and then right anterior and the left posterior are tested together, and we give a small head impulses to the patient, because of which there will be an action potential which will be generated in the superior vestibular nerve and the inferior vestibular nerve, depending upon which canal we are stimulating. Like here, if we take an example of LARP, left anterior, we are basically activating the superior vestibular nerve, whereas right posterior we are activating the inferior vestibular nerve. So that way the action potential is generated, and this action potential will pass to the different extraocular muscle, and because of which we are going to see the eye movement over here. So again, what becomes important for us when we are looking into cases with ANSD is nothing but the superior vestibular nerve and the inferior vestibular nerve here. Now, in the ENG VNG test battery, there are certain tests which assesses the central system or the central vestibular function. Basically, 3 tests are done. One is optokinetics, second is saccade, and third one is a smooth pursuit. Now, as I said earlier in the slide that basically when we are looking into ANSD cases, it is a pathology of the peripheral nerves, not the central nerves, and hence if we consider that the lesion is confined to the inner ear or the vestibular nerve, then what will happen is these 3 tests should come normal. Whereas if the lesion is at the level of the central vestibular system, then this test should be affected. Now, looking at all this, the permutation and combination, I have just made a slide here But I'm going to come back to this slide once again at the end of the presentation, where I'm going to tell that whether the results are coming in this way or the results are coming in a different way. Such as, for example, WEMP, as I said that the superior vestibular nerve and the inferior vestibular nerve both are important here. Both are important here in cases with ANSD when we are understanding the WEMP findings. And if the lesion is confined to the superior vestibular nerve and the inferior vestibular nerve, the WEMP should be absent or should be abnormal. Similarly, for caloric test, here the superior vestibular nerve is important, and if the lesion is again confined to superior vestibular nerve, in cases with ANSD, caloric test should show bilateral hypofunction responses. That means say that it should show bilateral reduced responses. And the video head impulse test, wherein we calculate the VOR gain, that is vestibulo-ocular reflex gain. And here again, if the lesion is confined to the superior vestibular nerve and the inferior vestibular nerve, the VOR gain should be reduced. And the central test, that is optokinetic, saccade, and the smooth pursuit. And if the lesion is confined here, the central test should be normal. But let us look into whether it is coming in the same way or it has got a different findings. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to put this again. Now let us look some review from the past, which have described these cases of auditory neuropathy and the vestibular. And this is the first article which is there on auditory neuropathy. Basically, the term auditory neuropathy, there are many studies which have described nerve disease, but auditory neuropathy term was coined in this particular article. And this is the first article wherein they have said that these cases with auditory neuropathy do have vestibular issues. And these authors basically they have described 10 such ANSD cases, in which 3 cases had nystagmus and 2 other cases had absent of responses to the caloric stimulation testing. That means say that the caloric test was basically abnormal, and 3 cases had the nystagmus which was present. And all these 5 cases were asymptomatic with regard to the vestibular dysfunction. That means say that they did not have any vestibular sign and symptoms. Okay, and in addition, these authors also reported that along with the neuropathic changes in the vestibulocochlear nerve, these cases also had an evidence of generalized peripheral neuropathy. That means that they had another additional neuropathic condition of the peripheral nerves also. The second article which I could find where they have described this, it's this article which was published in a Scandinavian Audiology in 1996, the same year. And again, it is not with the term of auditory neuropathy, but they say it auditory nerve disease. And there they have described 2 cases wherein they did ice water caloric testing, and which is also called as basically a Cobrax test, and which failed to elicit any nystagmus in either patient. Let me say that the caloric test was basically abnormal in the 2 cases which they described. And they said that along with the vestibular organs, in these cases there is also an involvement of the vestibular system also along with the cochlear system. The first article which was published with a title called as Vestibular Function in Auditory Neuropathy was by Sheikh Kolaslami and group. And these authors basically they have done some subjective test, and they have also done caloric test, and they have found that the caloric test was affected in these patients. And they said that along with the auditory neuropathy, that means say that along with the involvement of the cochlear nerve, there is also an involvement of the vestibular nerve in these cases. Now let us look into some of the vestibular sign and symptoms which we can find in cases with ANSD, and this is again the data from our clinic itself. And what we have to understand is, first is that ANSD is a bilateral disorder, bilateral symmetrical disorder. That means say that both the systems are affected to an equal extent, and hence what we don't find in cases with ANSD is the vertigo. Vertigo is not a consistent feature in cases with ANSD. They do not report of. You keep on asking them whether they have vertigo, they will say no, I don't have any vertigo issues. But they do have certain other issues which we found in our clinic. That is, first is blurring of vision upon prolonged gaze when they try to fix their gaze on an object, and they also have an oscillopsia and weakness of upper and lower limbs, difficulty walking on uneven surfaces in the dark basically. They also have unsteadiness, swaying while walking on a flat surface, lightheadedness, and isolated cases they have said vertigo, but this is not a consistent feature. Now, again, what we have to understand is these vestibular sign and symptoms, what we found was only in 40% of the subject. Remaining 60% of the subject were asymptomatic. They said that they have no issues at all. So majority of the cases with ANSD are asymptomatic in terms of vestibular disorders. Some of the subjective assessment result which I have just put in. First is by say Kulaslami et al., and where they said that the subjective tests such as Romberg, Mann, and stepping test, which show a normal result, But in our clinic, somehow we have found that these test subjective tests are not normal, because in most of the subjective tests, what we are doing is we are trying to remove the visual cues, and we are trying to remove the proprioceptive cues, and we are trying to make the patient depend upon the vestibular system to balance themselves. And we have found that when we have cut down the visual cues, or when we have cut down the proprioceptive cues, 99% of the subject are not able to perform either Romberg test or the stepping test, the Fukuda stepping test, or the tandem gait test. They have a falling sensation which is there, and that is what we have observed in our clinic. And the certain cases have certain this one, that they fall towards the right side or they fall consistently towards the left side. And when we try to find out that why they were falling towards the right side or why they were falling towards the left side, we found that in such cases there was a slight asymmetry in the audiograms. That means say that either the right ear was slightly poor compared to the left ear, or the left ear was slightly poor compared to the right ear. And we found that the patient was deviating, or patient was falling towards the side where the audiogram results were slightly poor compared to the other side. And that only to say that probably the right vestibular system was, or the left vestibular system was also affected more compared to the other side. Now I'm going to put on all the studies which we have done at our department one by one, which we are going to put in. And this was our first study way back in 2007, and this was a study on cervical vestibular evoked myogenic potential. And probably I'll say that then the cervical vestibular evoked myogenic potential was in the infancy stage, and we had finished with only one digitation in 2006, and then we had done this study. And in this particular study, we had 10 participants with auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder. And out of 10 subject with auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder, we tested basically 20 years, and the VEMP was basically absent in 16 out of 20 years. That means say that in 8 subject it was absent, and another 2 years where the amplitude of VEMP was reduced, another 2 years where the VEMP was normal. That means say that there was heterogeneity, but 9 subjects out of 10 subjects had abnormal or absent cervical vestibular evoked myogenic potential. And out of 10 auditory neuropathies spectrum disorder subject, we could find that only 3 participants reported of vestibular sign and symptoms. Remaining 7 did not report of any kind of vestibular sign and symptoms. And also the subject in whom the vestibular symptoms was present, there was no correlation between the vestibular sign and symptom which was present and the abnormal VEMP. That means say that where there was absent or abnormal VEMP, that had to do nothing with the absence of the vestibular myogenic potentials in these cases. So here in this study only, we suggested to use 2 terms, that is acoustic neuropathy and vestibuloacoustic neuropathy. To use acoustic neuropathy with the client in whom only the auditory neuropathy is there, that may say that in whom the vestibular nerve is normal, and to use the term vestibuloacoustic neuropathy in whom the term both the cochlear as well as the vestibular nerves are affected. So the 2 terminologies we have suggested, acoustic neuropathy and the vestibuloacoustic neuropathy, in this particular work. The second study which we had was in 2013. There was a long gap, and this particular study we have done cervical vestibular evoked myogenic potentials and the caloric, and basically we recorded CVEMP using 500 Hz tone burst. and we had only 3 ANSD then, because we were still trying to understand a lot about the caloric, not the WEMP, but caloric test then. And in these 3 cases, we found that the caloric test was hypoactive in all the 3 subjects. That means say that the caloric test was abnormal or reduced in all the 3 cases with auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder. And also the cervical vestibular evoked myogenic potential was absent in all the 3 subjects. So both caloric and WEMP was abnormal. Only 1 participant out of 3 participants reported with vestibular sign and symptoms. And we concluded that this subject, that is auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder, they have both the abnormality of the superior vestibular nerve and the inferior vestibular nerve. Superior vestibular nerve we concluded based on the caloric test, and inferior vestibular nerve we concluded based on the WEMP. This is another study where we did both CWEMP as well as OWEMP, and here in this particular study we took 11 subjects with auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder, and both CWEMP and OWEMP we recorded with 500 Hz tone burst, and we found that the ocular vestibular evoked myogenic potential was absent in all the cases with ANSD. However, the CWEMP was absent in 20 out of 22 years. That means say that only 2 years, but the 2 years were of not same subject. These 2 years were from 2 different subject, one subject which it was present. That means say that both the OWEMP and CWEMP abnormality was there. However, the abnormality of the OWEMP was more compared to the CWEMP in these cases, and we again concluded that these cases with ANSD, they have problem with the superior vestibular nerve as well as the inferior vestibular nerve. This is our study on again CWEMP and caloric, and this is more exhaustive study where we have taken 26 participants with ANSD, and we did basically CWEMP and the caloric. Again CWEMP we recorded with 500 Hz tone burst, and caloric we have used the normal water irrigation. And out of these 26 participants with ANSD, we had 2 cases who had Friedreich ataxia. So these cases basically had auditory neuropathy secondary to the Friedreich ataxia, which we found in these cases. And here when we looked into the WEMP responses, the WEMP responses was absent in 50 out of 52 years. Let me say that a majority of the subject had absence of WEMP, and only 1 year had normal latency of the WEMP, but the same year had the normal amplitude also. But another year, only 1 year had normal latency, and that year had a reduced amplitude. Let me say that only 1 out of 52 years was normal, remaining 51 years had abnormal or absent vestibular evoked myogenic potential, which goes on again suggesting that the lesion was confined at the inferior vestibular nerve in these cases. And looking at the caloric data, we found that the hypoactivity was there in 45 years out of 52 years. That means say that the responses were reduced in caloric test in 45 years out of 52 years when we analyze the responses, and 3 years had hyperactive responses. That means say that the responses were more, which indicated that there was a central involvement of the central vestibular function, and these cases were the cases with the Friedreich ataxia, and 4 cases had normal caloric responses. So this is the pool of the test finding which we got in the caloric. So majority what we have found is it is hypoactive or the reduced responses. Additionally, in this particular study, we found that there was no association between the degree of hearing loss and the caloric test result, the degree of hearing loss and the vestibular evoked myogenic potential, or the caloric test and the vestibular evoked myogenic potential. Let me say that no auditory test correlates with the vestibular test. Even the 2 vestibular tests do not have any correlation in cases with auditory neuropathy spectrum disorders. And this is another study which is in 2016 which we have done, and again we have done basically CWEMP and OWEMP again, and these were 31 individuals with auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder, and both we recorded CWEMP and OWEMP in these cases. And here the data I'm just putting here. What we have to look into, this is the table 1 is for the CWEMP and table 2 is for the OWEMP, and as we look into the normal subject, that is 31 subject, that is 62 years, all the 62 years the responses were present for the CVEM as well as it was present for the OVEM. However, in the CVEM, for the CVEM in ANSD cases, the responses were only present for 11 years, whereas for the OVEM, the responses were present only for the 6 years, So majority of the subject in auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder, they had absence of CVEM as well as they had absence of OVEM. Also, when we look into the amplitude of the VEM when it was present in the cases with CVEM or the OVEM. Now, when we look into the amplitude, we can see that the amplitude was much lesser for the CVEM as well as for the OVEM in cases with auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder. Also, we did not find any significant association between degree of hearing loss and absence of CVEM and OVEM. The duration since onset, that means say that the onset of the auditory neuropathy and the absence of the CVEM and the OVEM, then the presence of sign and symptoms, that is the vestibular sign and symptoms, and absence of CVEM and OVEM, and duration since onset, that means say that the onset of auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder and the presence of vestibular symptoms. Let me say that again, basically there was no correlation between any auditory and the vestibular test, and within the vestibular test again there is no correlation, and again the vestibular sign and symptom also does not have any correlation with the abnormality of the CVEM and the OVEM. This is the test where we have done caloric and the VHIT test, and we have taken 3 participants with auditory neuropathy spectrum disorders, and here the caloric was hypofunction in all the 3. That means say that the responses were reduced, again indicating that there was a problem with the superior vestibular nerve. And when we did VOR, that is VHIT, video head impulse test, we found that the VOR gain was reduced in 2 subjects, and also the refixation saccade was present in 2 subjects, and in 1 subject there was a normal VOR gain and the refixation saccade was absent. These are the 3 VHIT diagram I have just put on. As we can see that this is case 1, 2 and 3, and we can say that case 1 and 2 had presence of refixation saccade, which we can see here, and also the VOR gain was reduced for both the cases, whereas the 3rd participant had normal VOR gain and also there was no refixation saccade which was present over here. Let me say that there is a variability here. Now here what is important for us to understand is the 3rd subject, not the 1st and the 2nd subject, because in the 3rd subject the caloric was absent, that is nothing but the superior vestibular nerve was affected, and here which we can find that the 2 lateral canal when we have assessed, this was normal. That means say that these are 2 different mechanisms which it is indicating, which I am coming little later. And this is the last in the study, and this is we have taken 25 subjects with ANSD, and where we have done video head impulse test, and we have calculated the VOR gain. And here we can see that the VOR gain individual each subject wise, which we have tried to put it in the line graph, and here we can find that for a single subject itself in the different planes the VOR gains were varying. Some of the planes the VOR gain were normal. The VOR gain basically it is considered to be normal if the VOR gain is 0.80 and above. So if we can see into this, most of the subject you can see that in the different plane the VOR gain was reduced, but there were some subject wherein this subject had a very much a normal VOR gain like any normal subjects. And here also we found that a significant amount of cases had presence of saccade, that is both the covert saccade and the overt saccade, which you can see here. And there were some subject wherein the saccades was also not present. And here again we did not find any correlation between the duration of the disorder and the vestibulo-ocular reflex gain. That means say that if somebody had auditory neuropathy since 5 years, they had reduced VOR gain, and if somebody had auditory neuropathy since 1 year, they had normal VOR gain. There was no correlation. Even a neuropathy, a subject who had neuropathy since last 4 or 5 months also had a reduced VOR gain and a normal VOR gain. So again, there was no association between audiological findings and the VOR gain and presence or absence of saccades again. That means say that the degree of hearing loss and the pattern of hearing loss did not have to do anything with the VOR gain and the presence or absence of reflex. Coming back to the same thing, as I said that in the early this one slide that I'm going to discuss this once again. Am I going too fast or is it okay?
No,
Srividya,
that's fine.
fine, ma'am. Okay. So this is the slide which I had put it early, and I have just put it once again. So I have just summarized the vestibular test findings in ANSD and WEMP, that is both the cervical vestibular evoked myogenic potential and the inferior vestibular evoked the ocular vestibular evoked myogenic potential, where the superior vestibular nerve and the inferior vestibular nerve are matter of concern. And we found that in all the studies which we have done, the WEMP is either absent or it is abnormal. That is, both the CWEMP is both the CWEMP and OWEMP are absent or abnormal. The caloric test which we saw, the caloric test majority shows bilateral hypofunction responses. Only a group of subjects showed a normal response, and also some ears showed hyperactive responses, and that we know that these were cases with the Friedreich ataxia basically. And we hit, that is video head impulse test. Again here we have superior vestibular nerve and the inferior vestibular nerve coming into the picture, and here we found that the VOR gain is basically reduced. However, there are some cases for whom the VOR gain is basically normal despite the absent caloric responses, and this is basically very interesting because the caloric is also assessing the superior vestibular nerve, and the VHIT also we are assessing the superior vestibular nerve, and one is absent and other is normal. That is something which is very interesting in these cases. The central test, otherwise it is normal for all the cases but for the Friedreich ataxia cases which we had in that particular study. Now what we have to understand is that as I said that I'm going to give the reasoning for each of these, that why these are normal or these are abnormal or these are absent. Now we found that most of the cases in ANSD we have CWEMP and OWEMP which are either absent or which are abnormal, and these are abnormal or absent. This is first is the OWEMP, and if we consider that the auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder cases also have a vestibular neuropathy, then there will be a demyelinating condition or there will be an axonal neuropathy at the level of superior vestibular nerve, because of which either there is going to be a problem with the timing of the stimulus which will be traveling between the utricle and the vestibular nuclei, or either there is going to be a conduction block because of the axonal lesion, because of which the axon potential will not be reaching to the inferior oblique muscle, and hence we will not be able to record any potential in these cases. Similar thing will happen in the cervical vestibular evoked myogenic potential, and here what is important for us is the inferior vestibular nerve. So if the ANSD have a problem with the inferior vestibular nerve or neuropathy of the inferior vestibular nerve, either a demyelinating condition or either an axonal condition, the same thing which is going to happen is nothing but there is going to be a conduction block, because of which we will not be able to pick up any potential from the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and hence the result is that absent or abnormal cervical vestibular evoked myogenic potential in these cases. Now in most of these cases what we found was caloric test was hypoactive, and why the caloric test will be hypoactive is because when we are irrigating the cold and the warm water, as I said that the convection current will be set in the inner ear, and which will lead to generation of the axon potential in the superior vestibular nerve, and this axon potential will be going to the lateral rectus and medial rectus. And if we understand that these cases have a problem with the superior vestibular nerve, then we will not be able to pick any corneoretinal potential, because there will be no nystagmus which will be generated, and we will not be able to pick up any kind of corneoretinal potential when we are recording through ENG, and we will not be able to see any eye movement which will be recording through the VNG or the video nystagmography equipment. That's why the caloric test will become hypoactive. So the matter of concern here again is the neuropathic condition of the superior vestibular nerve. Now video head impulse test, and here we have found that there is a reduced VOR gain, and there is a generation of the saccade, the refixation saccade. And here again what we have to understand that again the same thing. When we are doing the VHIT or the video head impulse test, the axon potential which is generated in the superior vestibular nerve and the inferior vestibular nerve will not travel to the extraocular muscles, either because of a demyelinating condition or because of an axonal disorder, and because of which we will not be able to get a normal VOR gain, and the VOR gain is going to be reduced. So again, the problem is there with the superior vestibular nerve and the inferior vestibular nerve in the cases with auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder. Now here we also found that a significant proportion of the ANSD have normal VOR gain, and despite hypoactive caloric test. As I said that the caloric test is also assessing the lateral canal, and VHIT also we are assessing the lateral canal, and one being normal and other being abnormal also we have found, and we try to find out the reason, and we found that basically the vestibular system has got two types of fibers. These are called as regular fibers and the irregular afferent fibers, and the regular fibers basically the caloric test is processed through the regular fibers and VHIT is processed through the irregular fibers, and we presume this is only a hypothesis that probably there is a differential damage to the irregular fiber, basically, which is here there is a slight mistake, sorry, this is irregular, sorry, there is a correct, there is a differential damage to the regular fiber. That means say that the one which is processing the caloric test is affected compared to the VHIT test, and that is where we have these kind of findings. However, we have to still find out, this is just a hypothesis that this could happen, but we still have to find out that is this a reason or there is something else which is there. And there is an absence of vestibular sign and symptoms in most of the subject, and this could be because of two things. One is that bilateral distribution of the disorder. We know that 99% of all the ANSD have a bilateral disorder, and we presume that if they have bilateral cochlear nerve disorder, they also will have bilateral vestibular nerve disorders. That is one thing. And second thing which we have to understand is that the anatomical consideration which I told, that the vestibular nerves are more thicker compared to the cochlear nerve, and hence it will take little more time to get damage. That means say that damage will occur little later. The damage is going to occur, but it is going to occur later, and that allows the central system basically to compensate for the damage which is happening, and that gives enough or ample of time for the central system for this to compensate, and hence this subject, most of the subject do not have vestibular sign and symptoms. And we did not find correlation between audiological findings and the vestibular findings in any of the study, and that could be because of the anatomical differences in the system. Again, that is nothing but because the cochlear neurons are getting affected faster compared to the vestibular neurons, and the damage also may be differential. That is, there may be a more damage to the cochlear system compared to the vestibular system, or vice versa. We do not know because we do not have any histopathological evidence to say that. But this could be because of the anatomical differences between the two systems, that is the cochlear and the vestibular system. And we also did not find any correlation between the duration of the disorder and the vestibular disorder. That means that the duration of the ANSD and the vestibular disorder, the absence or presence of the vestibular test results. And that could be because of the heterogeneity of the disorder, because many of the subjects who just reported that they had a problems in 6 months, also they had absence of vestibular responses, and there were some subjects who had ANSD since 3 or 4 years. Also they said that their vestibular test results were absolutely normal. So there is a heterogeneity, and this is also our observation that the progression of the disease varies across the individual. That means say that for some individual the progression is really fast. It takes no time for them to the hearing loss to become from normal hearing sensitivity to profound hearing loss, and there were some cases who just progressed from a mild hearing loss to moderate hearing loss even at the end of the 5 years. So that could be one reason, that because of this heterogeneity there is no relation between the onset of the ANSD and the vestibular test results. Now there are some matter of concerns which look into the cases with vestibular disorder particularly, and this is again the data from my clinic only. And the first matter of concern here is this, that is predisposing factor. When we analyze that predisposing factor, we took the case history and we took the this one. Then we found that the majority of the cases with auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder who reported to the clinic, they all belong to the low socioeconomic status. Okay, and two reasons which I could figure out, but still we have to still find out that whether that is correct or not. One could be a nutritional factors, that is nutritional deficiency, and second is a use of pesticides in the fields, because there are not only reports of noise induced hearing loss cases, but there are also reports of chemical induced hearing loss cases. So that could be one reason, and this is a major concern for me when I look into all these cases. The second concern which is there in the auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder is the age group. If you look into the age group of these cases, what you find is, look at this age 11 to 15, 16 to 20, and this is the major. And here also again, this all data from our clinic only, and you can look into this again, same again 11 years, 15 years, 20 years. Let me say that typical at the time of pubertal onset, or say that 4 to 5 years down the lane or 6 years down the lane of pubertal onset. So my major concern over here becomes is, these cases, do they have any kind of hormonal issues? That is one thing which again a matter of concern, because it is occurring either at most of the cases at the onset of the pubertal onset or just after the pubertal onset, something going wrong, but we do not have any evidence to establish that or to say that this is the kind of this one which is there. The third concern which is there in these cases, what is the rehabilitation for vestibular damage? As I said that this most of these cases which are there, they remain asymptomatic. Almost 60–70% of the cases are asymptomatic. They do not have any vestibular symptoms, sign and symptoms. But there are some cases who have the sign and symptoms which are present, certain sign and symptoms. However, vertigo is not a consistent feature. So the rehabilitation option one is the VRT, but VRT could be only limited to basically the symptom specific, whatever the sign and symptom they exhibit. We could design the VRT and we could do that, number one. Number two, but always the hindrance is the progression of the disease. If some of the subject in whom the disease is progressing fast, it really becomes very difficult for one to administer VRT, do the VRT over the period of time, and so any kind of progress in these cases. That is what happens. And similar situation we face in the cases with Meniere's disease, because they have episodic vertigo. These cases do not have vertigo, but the Meniere's have episodic vertigo, and whenever there is an episode, the damage is again there, and again we have to start from zero. So the progression of the disease always becomes a major problem in these cases. So it's time for question and answer, and I hope I have finished 5 minutes before the time. Srividya ma'am.
Hello, you can hear me?
Yes ma'am. Yes ma'am, I can hear you.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Sudeep. We have questions. You want to take a break or you want to continue?
Ma'am, I can't hear you. Your voice is very.
Okay, you want to continue or you want to take a 5-minute break? We have some questions to be asked.
Continue, no problem.
Okay, fine.
Sir, should I start asking the questions now?
Yes, sure.
Yes, Imran, you can go ahead.
Yeah, please.
Yes, sir. Sir, the first question is regarding the, like auditory neuropathy is mainly seen or observed in kids, like, infants and children. So what are the vestibular tests that you can do to pick these, vestibular problems in infants and kids? Like, would you do a VEMP with such a high intensity, or would you be able to do a caloric? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, this is just a small thing which I want to add here is nothing but when we have observed the data, that is the data from our clinic and the data of the Western studies which we have found, we found that in the Western population, most of the cases which they report are children and the infants, and in these cases and in our clinic, what we observe, the most cases are basically adults. That is the difference in the data of the Western population and our clinic. I will not say Indian clinic because I am not aware of the other clinic what is the data, but in our clinic most of the data are adult data, number one. Number two, regarding very young infants and children, to be very frank, we are not doing any kind of vestibular evaluations because one thing is that nothing is safe to administer. Say that if I am doing WEMP and I am doing presenting 125 dB SPL of sound, it is not safe for the ear also. And second thing is that I cannot subject an infant to the caloric test because it is not pleasant. It induces a lot of vomiting and it induces a lot of this one to do it. To be very frank, in the infants we are not doing. In the little young children, 5 to 6 years, we are subjecting them to WEMP, but not before 4 to 5 years. We are not doing any kind of vestibular test at our clinic.
Right. So, do you have a safe assumption that a certain percentage of these infants who are diagnosed with auditory neuropathy would have some vestibular problems and may need
Yes, yes.
some vestibular, rehabilitation early in life?
The thing is that this is which we had done in cases with profound sensory neural hearing loss cases, and where we followed our own therapy cases. I mean, who were diagnosed at our clinic and who were taking therapy a little later also. We followed up and we did the vestibular evaluation in those cases, and we found that in cases with SNHL, who were of severe or profound degree, we found that a lot of them had vestibular issues, but they did not have any kind of vestibular sign and symptoms at the age of 5 years or 6 years. They were all normal. Their motor development was normal. But yes, initially in the beginning of their life, when we took out their case history, we found that they had a delay in their motor development, which was very evident. Neck control or walking or sitting, everything was delayed. But at a later stage of life, there is a central compensation which is occurring, and by the age of 3 or 4 years, they pick up and they become normal. And the problem is also not very much this one, because these cases with ANSD do not have any kind of vertigo. So that goes on saying that they might have slight issues, but not very kind of this one which is creating a panic in the patients.
Right, right. So for
Imran, can
clinician, yeah. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
I agree with Sujit. There are 2-3 things. One is that in the infants you can't do that because of the willingness of the parents to make the child to participate. It becomes an ethical issue, and therefore after that, once you, even in the adults, when you do it and you see there are abnormalities, we are not able to give them any kind of a rehabilitation technique, for a simple reason that they are symptoms free. As Sujit has said it, that symptoms probably would develop at a later date. But his data also shows that at a later date also the symptoms have not developed. And he also says that it can develop at any point of time. I do not know how longitudinally we need to look at this to understand the symptoms development, though you have a subclinical vestibular disorder, right? So from that perspective, I don't think that it's advisable for us to do the vestibular evaluation in children. Well, in adults it's possible because you can make them understand, and then as a research factor that you can do that. Sujit?
Sir,
Sujit?
not only that, the thing is that, sir, let me admit it that we are not trained to do the vestibular evaluation in children, and so we are not doing for anybody, not only ANSD subject, but not doing for anyone that way. And second thing is, sir, absolutely this one, that 60 to 70% of the cases remain asymptomatic even you follow up after 4 years or 5 years of their initial evaluation. They do not have any vestibular sign and symptoms. Only 30 to 40% of the cases have, and that too they do not have vertigo, so they don't panic. Basically, they have a slight imbalance issues or slight gazing problem. That's it. So basically we are not subjecting any infants or any children for this vestibular test, because the caloric test is seriously, it's so pathetic. I can tell you that it induces a lot of vomiting and a lot of vertigo, which I don't think the children will be able to tolerate it. And there will be unethical issues, and because we are not a medical professional, and if there are some additional symptoms, basically which we have also seen in adults, that is sometimes the BP just overshoots or sometimes the BP just undershoots because they will have a severe vertigo spells. I do not want to subject any of the child to the caloric test basically.
I agree with you totally. Imran.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Shiv Shankar and Dr. Sujit. So I was just asking on behalf of the clinicians who are using these assessments for auditory neuropathy in infants. So like Dr. Shiv Shankar pointed out, that there might be a subclinical vestibular issue which may not be exhibited as vertigo. Do you think that the clinicians who pick up these cases with auditory neuropathy should be sending these infants or kids for sensory motor integration therapy to occupational therapists to give them some sort of vestibular stimulation?
One thing which I would definitely recommend is a neurological opinion from a neurologist, and that helps because some of the cases which we have followed up over the period of time, they have not developed any vestibular sign and symptoms, but they have reported of generalized weakness in the body. That means either there is definitely an involvement of the peripheral nerves in certain cases, which is present at that point of the time when we are evaluating, or down the lane 3 or 4 years down the lane when they develop it, and that only goes on showing. I have experience with few of the cases wherein they developed tingling sensations and the neurologic pain in the legs and the hands after 3 or 4 years of onset of the auditory neuropathy. So it's recommended that if they find that there is a child or there is an infant with auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder, they must get them evaluated from a neurologist, and neurologist should look into the other involvement of the other neurons also, whether there is involvement of the other neuron, and that will help them a lot. And regarding the sensory integration therapy, yes, if the reflexes are still present, which would disappear at a particular age, and if there is a motor development, then OT will definitely help.
Imran.
Yes, sir.
Imran.
Yes, sir.
Sir.
Yes.
Yeah, not only infants, children, I think all patients with auditory neuropathy, whether adult or adolescent or
Yes,
children, have to be seen by neurologist.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You know,
That
because they will pick up some secondary pathologies there. Though we might call it auditory neuropathy a primary one, but then there could be other pathology which are there, and neuropathic auditory neuropathy can become a secondary, and primary could be anything else, and therefore they have to be evaluated by neurology. No doubt about it. Secondly, the point that Sujit
Yes.
was raised, that many of these children had delayed motor development. I don't know if I'm wrong, correct me. But not all children will have delayed motor development. Again, as the children.
Sir.
Very few maybe as a coexisting factor. But sending them to sensory integration therapy without having any symptoms of that sort, I don't think it is ethical and advisable.
No, sir. Only if there is a, if the parents find that there is a delay in motor development, then only. Otherwise, if they pick up normally, there is no problem. Because
Yeah.
of the bilateral distribution of the disorder, there is going to be central compensation which is going to occur. And in children, basically they pick up as per their age only. But there is a group of cases where they don't pick up, and there is a definite motor delay in these cases. And there, wherever they find a motor delay, then it is going to be helpful. Otherwise, in all the cases, it is not advisable. If they pick up, that's it.
Yeah. When we talk about the motor delay, what is the delay? How much is the delay that you consider? If you say the child should walk around 1 year exactly, may not happen in many children. In normal children also, there will be always a standard deviation. So we need to look at it. When do you call the delay? And when do you call them for sensory integration? If the child is not walked at the age of 1.3 but can sit and stand, would you send them? Children. So I don't know what is the protocol that you have to send refer the children for this kind of therapies.
No, sir. When there is at least a plus minus 6 months, we look into and then only we send, sir. Probably plus minus 6 months is an ample time, good time to say that whether there is a delay or not delay.
Then there will be also some cognitive issues that we need to look at it apart from cerebral palsy if there are any, if there is any.
Hi, yes, sir. I mean, the child will have to look as a whole, not only when we are looking at that auditory neuropathy, spectrum disorder, and then we have to look at everything, and then only we have to decide about the things, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
That was a great discussion, and I think it answered one of the questions as well in the process that if there is a motor delay present in children along with an ANSD, then how do we differentiate vestibular problems in these conditions? So I think it's a little bit of a combination of observation from the parents and the clinician and some of the signs and symptoms and things like that.
The thing is basically which we have to understand is the vestibulospinal reflexes, which is one of the important component in the vestibular system. And if there is a vestibular deficit, basically the input to the vestibulospinal reflex system is reduced. And that input which is reduced in the vestibulospinal reflexes is basically leading to a delay in the motor development in many of the children. And that is where it comes.
Sure. Thank you so much. The other question comes in regards to the subjective testing that you pointed out. You know that when you do the subjective test and you take the visual cues out, the subjects with ANSD perform poorly. So the question is that you know the person this is I think Kishan who mentions that in his experience he has seen that you know this is a very consistent finding in most cases with ANSD. So can we use that as a differential test to diagnose ANSD?
No, I will not use only that. I can only look for that whether the person has a vestibular issues or not. But I will not use this because there could be several coexisting factor in a particular patient. It is not only ANSD. There could be several other things. Something like I had a case wherein the case had peripheral neuropathy along with auditory neuropathy. And when we took the case history, the subject only told that the subject had only problem with the auditory system, the problem with the listening, and that's all. And subject did not tell any other thing. And when we found when we did the subjective test, we found that it was abnormal. And when we got the neurological evaluation done, then the neurologist told us that the case also has peripheral neuropathy. And we sent the case for further diagnosis, and we found that the case had peripheral neuropathy also. So I'm not going to use the behavioral test as a sole indicator for diagnosing a case with auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder, because there could be something else also in a particular case. The first thing is I'm going to diagnose that case as an auditory neuropathy, and then I'm going to look for the vestibular issues if it is present or it is absent.
Sure. Thank you, sir, for that. The next question, sir, is a very fundamental question, and this has kept reoccurring in the previous webinars as well. So I thought I'd you know, request you to clarify this as well. The question is that can a person with profound hearing loss get a normal WEMP responses?
Yeah, absolutely normal WEMP responses you can get, because what happens is what we have to understand is there are cochlear hair cells and there are vestibular hair cells. Now, in a particular pathology, there are chances that both the cochlear hair cells as well as vestibular hair cells will get affected, such as say that Meniere's disease. There are certain other pathologies where there is a very selective damage of the cochlear hair cells, but there are no damage to the vestibular hair cells. And second thing is that what we have to understand is when we are giving sound, now we are recording WEMP using basically a 500 Hertz tone burst. So we are using a sound stimulus. Now sound is a natural stimulus to the cochlear system, but sound is not a natural stimulus to the vestibular system. That's what we have to understand, number one. Number two, what we are doing is, when we are increasing the intensity of the sound, when we are recording WEMP, basically what we are trying to do is, we are trying to increase the movement of the fluid, that is the endolymph, towards the vestibular side, so that the hair cells can get depolarized. Otherwise, the vestibular system is insensitive to the sound, completely insensitive. It doesn't respond to the sound. So it is only that we are trying to increase the speed or the velocity of the endolymph towards the vestibular side. So the mechanism with which we are recording the vestibular evoked myogenic potential is totally different. So there can be n number of cases wherein you will find absolutely normal WEMP in the severe to profound SN hearing loss, provided there should not be any conductive component, number one. And there will be a group of patients where you will find the absence of WEMP in these cases. That goes on showing that both the cochlear as well as vestibular hair cells are damaged.
Thank you, sir, for
This case,
clarifying.
and these cases, basically, I would just say that these cases should not have any kind of obvious vestibular diseases. Then you will find that a group of cases wherein it will be absent also, a group of cases where it will be present also.
Thank you, sir, for clarifying that again. The next question, sir, is in regards to the regular and irregular vestibular nerve fibers that you discussed. Would you be able to clarify in terms of the anatomical and physiological role of these fibers, and whether which fibers require more synchrony than others?
This was basically our presumption when we got this and we started reading. We found that concept of regular and the irregular fiber. Now I go on like this. The caloric test basically is processing a low frequency stimulus, whereas VHIT is processing a high frequency stimulus. That is nothing but it's a low frequency and high frequency. Now when I say low frequency and high frequency, it is not in terms of the sound, but in terms of the action potential, which is basically generated during the caloric responses and generated during the video head impulse test. Now what happens is, this high frequency stimulus is basically carried forward by your irregular fiber, and the caloric responses, which is a low frequency response, are carried over by the regular fiber. That is nothing but regular and the irregular firing. When I tell, it is basically nothing but we have learnt about high spontaneous rate fiber and a low spontaneous rate fiber in the auditory neuron. Similar kind of a concept in the vestibular neuron also, wherein these are processed differently. And this is our assumption that probably the regular fiber are getting more damage compared to the irregular fiber, but that is just an assumption. We do not know if there are any other central system which is compensating for VOR gain in absence of a complete input from the peripheral system. That also we have to look into. This is just our assumption.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, the next question is in regards to the, the percentage of a high number of percentage of ANSD patients, either children or adults, who are subclinical or don't have any symptoms. Now, I believe that most of these cases with ANSD are bilateral. Very rarely we get unilateral cases, which means that the assumption is that we would have bilateral vestibular neuropathy as well. Now, in vestibular science, we understand that if it's a unilateral pathology, then it's easy to compensate for. But bilateral pathologies are hard to compensate. So if these are bilateral pathologies, why is it still a subclinical pathology?
Bilateral, there is a bilateral distribution of the disorder. If we go theoretically by the vestibular concept or the vestibular diseases which we understand, then what happens that unilateral cases do have compensation, such as vestibular neuritis, labyrinthitis, etc. do have compensation. Now bilateral vestibular disorder, here what happens is, it's most of the cases, almost 95% of the cases what we have seen are very slow progressive disorder, and that because of that only it gives the central system enough of time to compensate. That is where the compensation is occurring in these cases with ANSD, and they become subclinical in terms of the vestibular sign and symptoms.
Okay. Would you be able to clarify that a little bit more? Because what I am understanding is there is some disturbance coming. Okay. Can everybody mute their mics, please, from the panelists? There's a lot of disturbance coming from some. So, right, sir. So I was just asking. I'm still not understanding the point. So what you are saying is that there is a bilateral hypofunction, but there is still compensation because of the time that the disorder is taking to be clinically observable. Is that what you are saying?
No, Imran, there are two things which we have to understand. What typically I can consider the cases with ANSD is cases with bilateral vestibulopathy. That means say that both the peripheral systems are completely damaged. Okay, but differentiation between a typical vestibulopathy and ANSD is that the ANSD take little more time. That means say that the vestibular system, typically the vestibular neurons are having more diameter, and that takes little more time to get damaged, and that is allowing the central system to compensate. Whereas if there is a sudden fluctuation in the system, that is nothing but if suddenly there is a damage to both the sides, in that cases what will happen is the central system will not find time basically to compensate, because it has to compensate for many things. It has to compensate for vestibulo-ocular reflex, vestibulospinal reflex, cervico-ocular reflex. So all these reflexes has to be compensated. So it needs some time to compensate, and that compensation it gets ample time basically in cases with auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder. But if something is which is progressing very fast, say in auditory neuropathy only somebody is today mild at mild level, and after a month say it is at profound level, then the compensations might be slightly difficult in these cases too.
Right. No, that's very clear now. Thank you so much for explaining that again. Now the next question, sir, is so in regards to other tests or a good test protocol for diagnosing vestibular problems in ANSD, what would you suggest would be a good protocol for a practical clinical setup?
I don't know. It depends upon basically the equipments which are available in the particular clinic, basically that way. And as I understand that most of the clinic will have both, have evoked potential equipment. And if we have evoked potential equipment, we can definitely do the VEMPs, that is both the cervical and the ocular vestibular evoked myogenic potential at any point of the time. So if the equipments are not available, we can record VEMP, both the VEMPs at any point of the time. And because CVEMP is giving information about the inferior vestibular nerve, and the OVEMP is giving information about the superior vestibular nerve, I think along with the subjective test and the combination of CVEMP and OVEMP should be enough if the clinic does not have many equipment to assess the vestibular system.
Okay, sir.
But if the VNG is available, then it is something like a happy addition, because we'll have additional central test which can also tell me that how many of these cases do have a central problem also. So that totally depends upon the equipments which they have.
Sure. This is just a side question, sir, that do you often see speech and language deficiencies or developmental delays in cases with ANSD, especially children?
There is a delay of speech and language. This one in children with ANSD, and obvious because of the hearing problem or the hearing deficits which they have. And one of the thing which we have to be careful diagnosing the ANSD in early childhood is the cases of auditory maturation delay also, which we have to look upon whether they have auditory maturation delay or whether they have an auditory neuropathy spectrum disorder. First, we have to confirm on that, and then after diagnosing, yes, if they have a problem, they do have a delay in a speech and language development.
Thank you, sir. I think most of the questions have been answered by you. Some of them questions have overlapped, so I haven't bothered specifically asking you, because I think in the discussions we've already covered that. Now the panelists, if they have any questions, if they have any contributions, we are more than happy to have a panel discussion now.
Imran, may I?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Pradeep here. Sujit sir, Pradeep here.
Yeah, Pradeep.
Small clarification regarding the slide which you told on giddiness and lateralizing to the ear of audiogram. With the kind of heterogeneous nature and the fluctuating hearing loss, how sure are you about that particular statement of the giddiness and the lateralizing ear comparison?
Okay, in these cases, in that particular this one, the thing is that in these cases, we just pulled out some data that the certain cases why they were lateralizing to a particular site. But yeah, it will require a follow-up. But those when we pulled out these cases, we found that these cases had slightly, say that a 10 dB difference between right side and left side, and they were towards right side when the right ear was poor. And it just only to say that probably right ear, that is the cochlear branch, there is a more damage, and probably the damage has started from the right side, and then definitely, I mean, there is some damage which is more towards the right side. That's it. But we do not have any evidence to say that yes, there is a perfect correlation between the two. But yes, this is just an observation that yes, they do have that falling sensation towards the right side or the left side in slightly difference. But the problem is that most of the cases we do not find a significant difference between the two sides of two audiograms also. That is also which we have to look upon.
Okay, thank you. The second thing, sir, you told about the CVEMP and OVEMP, the probable explanation for why you really have this CVEMP and OVEMP loss, right? In that you mentioned about demyelination or the conduction block, which I presume is always predominantly seen in a secondary condition. How do we justify the demyelination conduction block explanation for a primary condition?
I didn't get your this one.
The question. Explanation you gave for CVEMP and OVEMP absent, right?
Yeah.
The reasoning was more of a demyelinating condition where the conduction block happens.
Demyelinating or an axonal diseases, because as in the site of lesion, I said that in the auditory neuropathy cases, we can have the site of lesion at the level of inner hair cells or the synapses between inner hair cells.
That's exactly precisely my question.
Similarly,
if the sir, 1 second, I'll finish the
question.
Yeah. Sir, can continue. So if the lesion is presynaptic or not exactly in the auditory nerve, then how good is that explanation, sir, which you told?
No, the thing is that what we have to understand is the same thing that there could be an involvement of the hair cells as well, and your hair cells, and this one gives the same result. But to be very frank, unless and until we go for kind of a transtympanic thing which is done as electrocochleography in the auditory system, where we say that there is a presynaptic lesion or there is a postsynaptic lesion. However, I don't know that how many cases they are able to classify that as presynaptic and postsynaptic lesion. Number one. Number two, the same kind of test we do not have in vestibular system, where we can say that there is a presynaptic vestibular lesion or there is a postsynaptic vestibular lesion. Number two. Number three, Most of the cases, when you look into the literature also, they say that there is a problem of the auditory nerve. There is a demyelination, there is this one, and those are some histopathological study. And only one study which was done in a cadaver histopathological, which I found, it was by again Professor Arnold Astar in 2003, where they have opened the temporal bone of particular cadaver, and they have found that the myelin sheath were fragmented in the vestibular nerve of that particular ANSD cases. Not only the myelin sheath was fragmented, but also there were reduced vestibular neurons between the peripheral and the vestibular nucleus. And they also showed that there were some beaded appearance of this neurons which were there. So presumably we presume that the cases might have a vestibular neuropathy, and neuropathy, when we are saying, we have to put under the term of a demyelinating condition or axonal condition. However, I say this one, that we do not have a test to separate the lesion of the hair cells from the synapse from that of the nerve.
Yeah, that exactly was my point. What I was saying is, in those conditions, until we see a secondary condition, my suggestion here would be we should be more general in giving a conclusion. If it is only based on the WEMP, we can probably stick on to saying the efferent pathway involvement rather than telling a demyelination, because being in Nimans, I know how precisely people interpret when we say demyelination.
No, that I will totally agree that if you consider we as being audiologist and them being doctor, I would definitely agree
Yeah,
that,
so that exactly when we say that it's convey wrong
because we are
information.
not opening the temporal bone, and we are not histopathologically confirming with anybody that they have a problem or they don't have a problem. So actually we cannot use auditory neuropathy also, and we prefer to use the term auditory dysynchrony rather than neuropathy. That will go on. So that way, these conclusions and this one regarding the same will I don't think ever end.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Imran, over to you.
Thank you, Pradeep, and thank you, Sujit sir, again for a very good discussion. Any other comments from the panelists? Anybody else would like to say something? So, sir, Sujit sir, the
If
case
Imran,
yeah.
in panel, Animesh sir is also there.
Let me just check.
No, he's not there. Yeah,
Okay.
he's there in the audience.
I think Al Fargal Mohammed and Animesh sir both were showing up, but I think there were some issues for us to add. Is that right, Srividya ma'am? There were some issues to
Yeah,
add.
we were not able to add them, but I have switched on Animesh sir's mic. If he can talk, he can. I mean, he can interact. Animesh sir, you can hear us? Hello.
Animesh sir, can you hear us?
I think.
Hello, can you hear me? I can hear you.
We can hear you, sir.
Yeah. I really don't know what is the comment you want from my side. Is basically
Sir,
two things I would like to say. One is about doing WEMP in children. I feel it is possible. My logic says it is possible because I always go by the density of the skull. Okay, because of the immature skull with the lesser intensity, I think I'm sure you'll be able to, especially the bone vibrator, it should be able to stimulate. And I think it is still possible. Basically, we need to do a study on this and see with the lower intensity whether it is possible or not. Second logic I will go by is that because we do ABR, when you do ABR in severe to profound hearing loss cases, we do present intensity around 90 dB NHL or so, and 90 dB NHL might come up to 90 plus 25, 115 dB SPL. So I think we can try out at maybe 100 dB SPL or 105 dB SPL because it is not completely matured. So it might get stimulated even with the lower intensity. So that could be a possibility. And second thing is what Pradeep has said is that demyelinating condition and all that. I think what Dr. Sujit is trying to say is that he is just trying to say take the concept of auditory neuropathy and placing it in the vestibular neuropathy. So basically what he's trying to say is that it is very rarely that the auditory neuropathy is independent of the primary auditory neuropathy and it is not or doesn't affect the vestibular neuron as such. If you see his all the studies which he have shown, he has said that the almost 80 to 90% of the individual they tend to have abnormal vestibular test results. So basically, what I'm trying to say that no, it should be the not the acoustic. That is what he's started saying that you should not say it is the acoustic neuropathy versus acoustic vestibular neuropathy. So he has just taken the concept of demyelinating condition from the auditory nerve to he has placed it in the vestibular nerve and said whatever physiological changes you get to see in auditory nerve, similar physiological changes you will get to see even in the vestibular nerve. So it will have a similar effect. And then Imran, you have asked him one question saying that bilateral. A lot of probably I think Sujit will be the better person to tell. He said the compensation is the one thing, and probably the another thing is the some of the balance system do get input from both the sides, and if there is a symmetrical effect in both the sides, that those symptoms which are usually shows asymmetrical input to the center might show some vestibular symptoms because it is bilateral, because it gets symmetrical input to the brain, it may not show such symptoms. So these are the three things which I felt I could share. I'll share with you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you
sir.
so much, sir.
Yes.
Srividya ma'am, can you unmute the mic for Dr. Al Fargal as well if he wants to say something?
It is unmuted. I messaged him. He's not responding, so I don't know what is the status.
Okay. Okay. So, Sujit sir, I just forgot to ask one more question. In the meanwhile, a couple of questions were regarding the cases that you saw, with vestibular, disorders in ANSD. What kind of management did you do with them?
Hello. Yeah, the thing is that most of the cases remain asymptomatic. So who were asymptomatic, we have not done anything with them because they were all fine. In some cases, we tried with during the VRT when they had a problem, when we assessed during the Romberg or the Fukuda stepping test, when we found that they were not able to balance when we were removing off the visual cues and the proprioceptive cues. We just tried concentrating on some task where we designed where we could remove the visual cues and the proprioceptive cues, and we made them to balance basically. So it was only dependent upon that what they were exhibiting basically that way. So one is that falling sensation. When we had we knew that okay, the person has a problem with when we are removing the visual cues, or these individuals will also report a problem in the dark. If they have to walk in the dark, they will say that I can't do that. And uneven surfaces, like if they have to climb the staircase in the evening, they cannot do that. So just designing certain protocol based on the difficulty which they have, and just it's all VRT is all about the habituation and the adaptation of the situation. So we have designed in a similar way, and we have done depending upon each case, and we do not have a kind of a same protocol for all of them.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much for clarifying that question as well, sir. I think if there are no more questions, I think we can wrap it up. But thank you so much, Sujit sir. I really appreciate the lucidity of your presentation, and I think it's a very novel concept in regards to the clinical aspects. Like, of course, it's very obvious that we would think that, okay, if there is an auditory neuropathy, that there has to be some vestibular sort of neuropathy as well. But then doing something in practice and then trying to prove that there is actually a possibility like that, and then trying to build a protocol and justifying a protocol in the neurophysiological aspect. I think it was a great job, and I think we really benefited a lot from this presentation. Thank you so much again for your time, and also kindly agreeing to swap your presentation earlier, because I'm really apologetic to ask you for such a favor, but I think that we had those unforeseen circumstances and we had to bring it forward. But thank you so much for cooperating with us and giving us such a good input for vestibular issues in ANSD.
Thank you, Imran. Thank you, Imran and Srividya madam, for giving me this opportunity. And I am also thankful to my director who gave permission for me to present here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Sujit. Thank you, all the panelists. Thank you, Dr. Shivshankar sir. He didn't have time. He left, but I would like to mention his name. Thank you, Dr. Pradeep. And Dr. Animesh, I'm sorry to get you on hold and asking you to unmute and speak, but we had to get you on call. And thank you, Dr. Sujit. I really appreciate
you,
now
ma'am.
you agreed for swapping the presentation. It was very timely
No
because we
problem,
didn't
ma'am.
want to. Yeah, thank you.
No problem, ma'am.